Hello everyone, this is Becky Goldsmith. I'm half of Piece of Cake Designs, and today I want to show you how you make the wheels, the little wheel details at the center of each of the Aunt Millie's Garden blocks. I know that many of you have looked at these and imagined that they are pieced, but they are not. These are appliqued. And it's a lot easier to do than you think it is when you look at the pattern. So in brief, what you do is construct these off the block. You have the bottom fabric. In this case, I used a yellow polka dot. And you applique each of these spokes onto a larger piece of fabric. Then you applique the center circle and then cut it down as a unit and applique it to the block. Now this one looks a little more complex than it really is because I used a striped fabric for each of these wheels, and I cut them carefully so that I got this very nice effect. So let's go over how you do this. Let me set that aside. This is what the wheels look like on the pattern. Each one of the wheels at the center of these blocks are exactly the same. They are numbered differently because there's different numbering sequences for each block. So in this block, the center wheel is numbered 13 and 14. Now the way I envisioned these when I was numbering the blocks were that the number 13, the darker color, was behind the lighter number 14 spokes. So in this case, number 13 is the big circle. Number 14 is each one of these light spokes on top of it. So whether you applique yours with that dark in front, light on top, or light in back, dark on top, it doesn't really matter. The way the templates are, 13 is the big one, the big circle, and 14 is the smaller spoke. Okay, so I made my templates for each of the two shapes, and for now I'm ignoring the center circle. That's number 15. What I did was take my sandpaper board and the background fabric. I pressed the background fabric in half one way and in half the other way. I used the iron for this. I opened that back up, and I've already done it. I made a mark, a small mark about 1/4 of an inch long, on the ends of each one of these pressed in lines. Then I set that aside. I took the fabric that I'm going to use in this demonstration for the spokes, and I placed that right side up on my sandboard. I placed this, the number 14 spoke template on this fabric on the diagonal grain of the fabric, because a bias edge turns under and sews more easily than one that's on the straight of grain. I traced around these shapes, in this case with my white chalk pencil, because it shows up better on the orange fabric. Now these are little small pieces. If you cut this out with its 3/16 inch seam allowance, it's going to be harder to handle. What I did instead was cut these out with a larger seam allowance all the way around. I'm going to use a technique called cutaway applique on these spokes. Before you position the spokes on this wheel fabric, you need to trace the wheel onto this fabric. You can look at the template and see where the center lines from the pattern are. And see how they cross in the center? Those dashed lines continue along the long edges of some of these spokes. So when you are ready to position the wheel template on wheel fabric, it's a good idea to line up those center lines with the pressed in grid on your background. Well, on the background of this circle, and then go ahead and trace around it. And I believe you can see the circle that I've already drawn on here. Now I want to position this spoke where it needs to be on this circle. Before I do that, I want to finger press. Let me pull in here just a little bit. I want to finger press the edges that I'm going to turn under and sew. So I'm going to take my fingers and press the lines under. Remember, you want to turn the chalk line all the way to the back of the applique piece. You should not see any chalk line on the front. On each of these long edges, finger press beyond the end of those drawn lines. You don't need to scrape this with your finger, you don't need to iron it, you don't need to do anything other than what you just saw me do. Now, I'm going to take the overlay for the whole block. This is the overlay for the entire block, and I've got the center lines for the block drawn on the overlay right there. And I know that the reflection here is not so good. Let me see. No, that doesn't help. What I'm going to do is line up the center lines on the overlay with the pressed in lines on this piece of fabric. I'm going to lift the plastic up and position the wedge in place underneath there. Now you can use your fingers to do this, or the point of the scissors, or a stiletto, or your toothpick, any number of things. And I think I've about got that done. Let me hold this up so you can more easily see it. There you go. Once this is in position, I would remove the overlay, and then I'm going to pin this in place with the 1/2-inch sequin pins. I'm going to rotate this so that it's easier to get the pins in. You don't want to pick this up because you'd risk getting your shape out of position. I'm going to sew this line first, and I would begin sewing here and stop sewing there and knot my thread, bury the tail, and then begin again sewing on the other side. So my pins are going to be better off placed right here so that they are about 1/4 of an inch away from the line where I'm going to cut away this excess seam allowance and turn it under. You want to leave room for the seam allowance. Now I've got my thread, orange thread, in my needle. I'm going to pick this up, bring my thread up right here at the beginning of this line. Now, of course, you need to cut away this extra fabric, hence the name Cutaway Applique. And I don't have my very favorite scissors here to use. The scissors I've been really liking for this are my Karen K. Buckley small scissors. They're really nice for this job, but I didn't bring them in by the camera. Oh, and I need them. Well, what I have instead, and these are a huge scissor for this job, but they'll work. These are the Karen K. Buckley larger shears, and they are very nice scissors to work with. A little big for this job, but they'll work. I'm going to set that aside. And then I would turn this under and applique it in place. Turn it under, sew to here, knot your thread on the back, cut the thread, and begin again on the other side. Knot your thread there, take it to the back and knot it there. Now, I didn't say, but I should say, once you get to the end and you knot your thread here and you turn this to sew your way out, you will of course need to trim away the fabric on the second side of the applique. before you sew. But having that extra fabric there makes this piece much easier to hold on to it during the sewing process. So that's how you do one. The next one I would sew would be just opposite this, on the other side of this circle. And then I would go back and sew more. Now, last night I was preparing pieces so that I could show you here on camera how this works. And I got this many done, and I decided that really you guys could tell from this how it goes. So you would go along and sew. I sewed spokes to each side. I would sew this one and then that one, and I'd work my way around, keeping my applique balanced around the wheel. Once I have all of the spokes sewn in place onto the bottom circle, I would trim away. And I can trim away one side of this to show you how it works. I would trim away the excess fabric, leaving a 3/16 inch seam allowance out here. Be very careful not to cut this off too short, or you'll have trouble turning that edge under. So you would do this, and we're pretending now that I have all of the spokes on this, but I do not. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you, though, is that when you applique this to the block, you'll be appliquing the bottom circle where there's just one fabric, and when you come up to one of the wheels, that turns under as well. And the thing that I'm careful of when I sew these is that when I turn under this first one, you don't want to turn that under so far that you make yourself a little ridge there when you turn under the second one. So as I turn this under and then come up to the extra, the bulkier fabric here where I've got more to turn under, I do my best to smooth out that join. Although there is more fabric here, so you are going to get a little bit more fabric turning around that outer edge. I tend to choose a thread that's going to look good on both of these fabrics. I myself would not want to change thread from here to here. For this, I'd probably use a sort of medium orange, and I think it would work really well. Now that you've seen how that works, I want you to go back. Let's look at this. And you can see how that join at the edge of each one of these works. It's the easiest way that we know of to sew a shape like this, and I hope that this little tutorial is helpful. Happy sewing!